Okay, in this short video, we're going to consider how we can go about balancing equations, and we're going to do this by following a method called the bubble method. Now, before we get to before we talk about the actual balancing of equations, before we look at the bubble method itself, one of the things that we've got to absolutely do is make sure that we completely understand formulae. So if we look at this first compound, so we've got potassium fluoride, you'll know there's just the symbol for potassium, that's K, and there's just the symbol for fluorine. So what that's telling us is that in that compound there is 1 times potassium and there is 1 times fluorine. If we look at the next formula, which hopefully you recognize as being water, H2O, one of the things that you'll notice is there is a subscript. Okay, so subscript means below the line. So there's a subscript number. So it says H2O. Now, when you get a subscript number, what that number is referring to is it refers to the number to the element just before it. Okay, so that 2 is referring to the hydrogen here. So what that means is when we consider that formula, there are 2 times hydrogens and there is 1 times oxygen. When we look at the next one, which is calcium carbonate, so it's CaCO3. So we have got a subscript number again, right? We've got that 3 there. That comes straight after the oxygen. So that number is referring to the oxygen. There is nothing after the carbon, there's nothing after the calcium. So what we've got here is 1 times calcium and 1 times carbon and 3 times oxygen. And then lastly, you'll notice we have a subscript again. So this is magnesium hydroxide. So there's our subscript. Now that subscript is outside the brackets. So what that subscript is saying is that it refers to everything inside the brackets. Okay, so there's there are 2 OHs. So again, if we're doing our tally, we're going to have 1 times Mg, and we're going to have 2 times oxygen and 2 times hydrogen. Now, the reason that this is important for what we're about to do in the bubble method is we're going to write the formulae in terms of the numbers of each element there is in that formula. And we're going to then, the reason it's called a bubble method is because we're going to sort of put a ring or a bubble around what we've done there. And that's something that we cannot change. And we're going to be using that when we come to balance our equations. So if we look back at the potassium fluoride at the top here, there's 1 K, there's 1 F. So actually my bubble isn't really going to look much different to what the formula or how it's presented there. If we look at the water, I said there were 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So we would write this in our bubble formula method like this. So it's just it's an easier way of keeping tally of what we've got. If we think about calcium carbonate, we said 1 calcium, 1 carbon and 3 oxygens. So in my bubble method, I'm going to write it as this. So I'm going to sort of show the 3 oxygens and then I'm going to put my bubble around it. And then if I was doing magnesium hydroxide here, I've got 1 magnesium, I've got 2 oxygens and I've got 2 hydrogens. So in terms of my bubble method, I would draw it or write it, like that. Okay, so to be able to even begin to balance equations, we've got to understand what the formulae are telling us. We've got to realize what those little subscript numbers mean, like the 2 there and the 3 here, and then the 2 here. And then, so we've got to be able to write our formulae out just in terms of the number of each element, like what I've done in green here with the circles, and that is going to be why it's going to be called the bubble method. So let's have an actual look then at some examples. So we're going to sort of work through some examples. I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing, and then hopefully by the end of it, I think there are 5 examples. Hopefully by the end of it. And you may want to pause the video anyway while we're going through it and have a go at yourself before you actually hear my talk through. then hopefully at the end we're going to have a pretty good idea about how to balance any equation. All right, so we're going to start with something actually that, it's actually fairly straightforward as they go. You might be able to do something like this in your head, but let's make sure that we're following the method that we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to change these colors. All right, so the first thing to do is to split your equation into two halves. Like this. And so we've got the left hand side and right hand side. The left hand side are the reactants, so they are anything to the left of the reaction arrow. There's the reaction arrow there. And then on the right hand side we've got our products. There is only one product here, the sodium chloride, but we're going to keep a tally of that separately. So at the moment sodium is just sodium, and there's my bubble. Chlorine is Cl2, so I'm going to write 2 chlorines. Okay, ClCl. And then I've got NaCl, which is actually, I'm just going to write the same formula for my bubble because it's 1 sodium and 1 chlorine. So this is how we're starting. So let's look. We're comparing the numbers of each element on each side of the, on each half, as it were, or on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So if I look on the left, I've got at the moment 1 sodium, and if I look on the right, I've got 1 sodium. So at the moment, that's balanced. If I look on the left, I've got 2 chlorines, and I look on the right, I've got 1 chlorine. So I don't have enough chlorines on the right-hand side. Now the only thing you can do, and this is critical to how we use this method, sorry, all I can do now is add another bubble that's got a chlorine in it on the right hand side. So that means I now add another NaCl. So let's check our chlorines. I've got 2 chlorines, I've got 2 chlorines, that's great. However, I've got 1 sodium on the left and I've got 2 sodiums on the right, so they are no longer balanced, although they were before. So all I can do is to put another sodium on the left. I do my check. I've got 2 sodiums. I've got 2 sodiums. I've got 2 chlorines. I've got 2 chlorines. So now I've got the right number, or the same number of each element on both sides. And then I count my number of bubbles up. And if it's more than 1, I put that number before the formula in the original equation. So I have 2 sodiums, so I'm going to put a 2 in front of the Na. I still only have 1 bubble underneath my chlorine, so I don't need to put any number there. And then if I look on the right hand side, I've got 2 bubbles, so I'm going to write a 2 in front of the NaCl. And that now is my balanced equation. Let's have a look at another example. So again, I'm going to split in half, or have the reactants, make it clear, the reactants on the left, products on the right. I've got an Mg, so put my bubble. I've got O2, which means I've got 2 oxygens, put my bubble, and then I've got an MgO, put my bubble. Okay, so I've got 1 magnesium on the left, got 1 magnesium on the right, that's great. Got 2 oxygens on the left, I've got 1 on the right. So I need to add, or need to have another oxygen on the right. The only thing I can do is to add another bubble. So that's another MgO. So now I have 2 oxygens on the right, 2 oxygens on the left. Excellent. I have 2 magnesiums on the right, and at the moment I only have 1 magnesium on the left, so I'm short. So I have to put another magnesium. Do a quick check. 2 magnesiums, 2 magnesiums, 2 oxygens, 2 oxygens. Everything is completely balanced. So now I can count my number of bubbles. I've got 2 magnesium bubbles, so I'm going to write a 2. in front of the Mg. I've got 1 oxygen bubble, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. And I have 2 MgO bubbles, so I'm going to write a 2 in front of my MgO. And then we have our balanced equation. So actually, the balancing of this reaction was exactly the same as the balancing on the previous reaction. Okay, so now let's take it a little bit further. So we're going to have a new type of equation. All right, so not like the ones we've just seen before, or maybe it is. Maybe it's a metal and a halogen. Well, anyway, we'll see, won't we? So split it in half. Make sure you're separating the reactants from the products. Okay, I've got 1 aluminium. Oops, sorry about that. I've got 1 aluminium. Put my bubble around it. My bromine is Br2, so I've got 2 bromine atoms. Put my bubble around it. And then I've got AlBr3, so that's aluminium and 3 bromines. So Al and then 3 bromines. And then I put my bubble around it. Okay, so looking at this, I have 1 aluminium on the left and I have 1 aluminium on the right. So at the moment my aluminiums are fine. I have 2 bromines on the left, but I have 3 bromines on the right. So I don't have enough bromines on the left. All I can do is to add another bubble. So that's what I've done. Let's check that now. I've got 4 bromines on the left, but actually I've now only got 3 bromines on the right. So now I have too few bromines on the right. So all I can do is add another another bubble on the right. Okay, so let's compare the number of bromines. I've got 6 on the right. I've got 4 on the left. So now I don't have enough on the left. So sometimes what happens in balancing equations is you end up going backwards and forwards. That's absolutely fine, right? That's to be expected. Anyway, so I need to add another bubble with bromine in it on the left. So I've done that now. So I've got 6 bromines on the left and I have 6 bromines on the right. So fantastic. I've got the right number of bromines. Let's check our aluminiums again. I have 1 on the left, but I have 2 on the right. So I'm going to have to add another aluminium. There we go. And now let's just check that. So I've got 2 aluminiums, 2 aluminiums. That's great. I've got 6 bromines, 6 bromines. That's great. And now I count up my bubbles. I have 2 bubbles, 2 bubbles with aluminium on the 2 bubbles of aluminium, so I put a 2 there. I've got 3 bubbles of bromine, put a 3 there, and I have 2 bubbles of aluminium bromide, so I put a 2 there, and now I have my balanced equation. Okay. Right. Something a little bit different. So now you can see we've got 2 products on the left. We've also got 3 elements with oxygen in them. So that's going to be interesting. So still start in the same way. Separate my reactants and products. Write the formulae now with the right number of, by making it clear how many atoms is in it. So we've got a carbon. Did that last time, didn't I? Sorry. I've got a carbon and then I've got 4 hydrogens. Put my protective bubble around it. I've got 2 oxygens. Protective bubble. I've got a carbon and 2 oxygens. Put my bubble. And then I've got 2 hydrogens and water. Put my bubble. Okay. Now, when you've got an element that appears in more than one compound, on a side, right? So if we look at the right-hand side, we can see that oxygen features in 2 different compounds. Then my advice is to focus on that element last in the whole process. So we've got two other elements we've got carbon and we've got hydrogen. So my advice is to focus on the carbon and the hydrogen first, get those right, and only then start looking at the oxygen. So let's have a look at, start with carbon, because it's the first element we've got here on the left. So we've got one carbon on the left and we've got one carbon on the right. Fantastic. We have 4 hydrogens on the left, but at the moment we only have 2 hydrogens on the right. So we're going to have to add another bubble that contains the hydrogens. So HHO. Okay, so 4 hydrogens, brilliant. Triple check, one carbon, brilliant. So now we're just down to the oxygens. So on the left hand side I've got 2 oxygens at the moment, and on the right hand side I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got 4 oxygens, so I'm going to need to add a bubble containing the oxygens on the left. So do that. Let's just count them now. 4 oxygens. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 oxygens. That's great. My hydrogens haven't changed. My carbons haven't changed. So now I'm balanced. So now I'm putting in front of the formula however many there are. Well, I've only got one bubble of the methane of the CH4, so I don't need to put a number. I've got 2 bubbles of the oxygen, so I put a 2 in front of it. I've got 1 bubble of the carbon dioxide, so I don't need to put a number. And I have 2 bubbles of water, or of the H2O, so I put a 2 in front. And there we go, there we have a balanced equation. And then the last one, okay, again, something with 2 products. Again, we've got to make sure that we separate the reactants and the products. Okay, and then let's draw our bubbles. So just an aluminium, just a hydrogen and a chlorine. And we've got an aluminium and 3 chlorines. Okay, and then we've got hydrogen with 2 hydrogens. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's work from the left. Got 1 aluminium, got 1 aluminium. Fine. Got 1 hydrogen, got 2 hydrogens. Right, so we don't have enough hydrogens on the left, so I have to put another bubble with the hydrogen in. Okay, so I have 2 hydrogens and I have 2 hydrogens. That's great. So now we move to chlorine. I have 2 chlorines and then I have 3 chlorines. So I don't have enough chlorines on the left-hand side. So I'm going to add another bubble which contains the chlorine. Just check the chlorines now. I have 3 chlorines. I have 3 chlorines. Fantastic. But I have added another bubble which contains an H. So let's just check the H's. I've got 3 hydrogens. I've got 2 hydrogens. Okay, that's no good. So I need to add another bubble on the right which contains the hydrogens. There we go. So now I have 4 hydrogens. Oh, but I only have 3 hydrogens on the left. So I have to add another bubble on the left. Check the hydrogens. I have 4 and I have 4. Great. But obviously I've added a bubble which contains chlorine, so I check those chlorines. So I've got 4 chlorines on the left, but now I've only got 3, so my chlorines are no longer equal. I need to add another bubble that contains the chlorine on the right hand side. Okay, there we go, there's our second bubble. Now what have I got? I've got 6 chlorines on the right. I've got 4 chlorines on the left. So I'm too short, so I'm going to draw 2 more bubbles to get those chlorines right. So, oops. So I've got 6 chlorines on the left, 6 chlorines on the right. Fantastic. How about the hydrogens? I've got 6 hydrogens on the left but I've only got 4 on the right. So I'm going to add another bubble. Double check that. 6 hydrogens. 6 hydrogens, superb. Now what about the aluminium? So it's sort of got forgotten since the beginning. So I've got 1 aluminium on the left, but I have 2 on the right. So I'm going to have to add a bubble containing aluminium on the left. So 2 aluminiums, 6 hydrogens, 6 hydrogens, 6 chlorines, 6 chlorines. Fantastic, completely balanced now. So now I've just got to make a note of how many bubbles I've got. So I've got 2 of the aluminium bubbles, so I put 2. I've got 6 of the HCl bubbles, so I write a 6. I have 2 of the aluminium chloride bubbles, so I write a 2. And then finally I have 3 of the hydrogen bubbles, so I write 3. So there we go. So hopefully that's made sense. I think this bubble method is actually a really useful and visual way of going about balancing equations. Of course, once you're sort of, once you've done enough practice, you'll probably be a different way to do it, a quicker way. Well, to do it maybe more in your head than perhaps at the moment you can. But that's something for the future. Make sure that you've really got on top of it first. And if you have any queries, please let me know.